Donna for the privilege of being the first venue to host this exhibition. This exhibition was a journey on many different levels: emotional, spiritual, physical, and artistic. Donna's trip to Manitoba allowed her to explore and reconnect with her Métis heritage, to hear stories about her ancestors, walk upon her ancestral land, and visit with family. She also went on an artistic journey investigating new alternative photographic processes, and I'll let Donna share all the experience she had in both journeys. Donna had a clear vision for the exhibition, but also left some things to chance, enthusiastically embracing the unforeseen. She has often mentioned to me that some of her ancestors were shamans, and throughout her journey she felt their presence and their guidance. Whether intuitively or intentionally placed, her layering and intersecting of multiple images created a mystical and evocative atmosphere. The printed images are impactful examples of post-conceptual fine art that verge on abstraction, some reminiscent of Gordon Smith's textured landscapes. The prints draw the viewer in and allow space for imaginings and interpretation. Donna, as you lived and were raised in Burnaby, I know it was important for you to mount the exhibition in Burnaby, and specifically in a communal space. I'm honored you chose the Shadbolt Centre of the Arts. I know this is a significant and exquisite show, and it'll be invited to many more exhibition spaces. After it's run here, it will go to the Monica Reese Gallery for April as part of the Capture Photography Festival. Congratulations to you on that. I'd like to now to give you a rundown of this evening's events. Cassandra Sisson from the BC Métis Federation will give a brief introduction to Donna Mueller. And I want to thank Cassandra, Jeannie, wherever you are, and the BC Métis Federation for the support of this exhibition and event. Please take a look at the Métis display they installed to accompany Donna's exhibitions just outside of the Galleria case. And to connect with the BC Métis Federation, they have a table at the back of the room. After Cassandra, Donna will then take the podium to give a half-an-hour artist talk and slideshow. At approximately 5:40, we will open the floor for questions and discussion. Donna has also created a beautiful book on the exhibition and her story. At 6 p.m., the book will be available for purchase just outside the entrance, cash, credit, or debit. And Donna will be signing copies and is looking forward to chatting with you. At the same time, she invites you to sample the charcuterie table laid out by Tonshi Catering Service. Please take the time to revisit the exhibition with more insight and to socialize. Our evening festivities will end at 7 p.m. For the support mounting this exhibition, I would like to briefly thank my visual arts team, Janine Schroeder, Sarah Graham, and Cassia Jung, the custodial and technical staff with their leads Willow Gray, Susan Navarez, and the City of Burnaby for the support of cultural programs and events. Again, thank you for your presence here today, and thank you, Donna, for your trust, collaboration, and especially your art.
Thank you, Marianne, and congratulations, Donna. My name is Cassandra. I'm here representing the BC Métis Federation, and I'm going to do a welcome in French Michif, so please excuse me if I butcher it. Allô, bonsoir, bienvenue à l'Assemblée. Mon nom c'est Cassandra, puis je suis la directeur of communications à BC Métis Federation. Moi, je viens de Winnipeg, puis le nom de ma famille de Michif, c'est Leclerc, Allard, Ducharme, puis Brown. Hello, good evening, welcome to this meeting. My name is Cassandra. I am the Director of Communications at the BC Métis Federation. I am from Winnipeg, and my Métis family names are Leclerc, Allard, Ducharme, and Brown. Today I'm very excited and honored to introduce you all to Donna's work. She is a BCMF member, and this is her master's thesis and is the culmination of a lot of hard work and discovery. Donna's story is unique, but it is also quite common in our circles and with our members. The BC Métis Federation is a grassroots organization and a nonprofit that works with Métis communities to advocate for and on behalf of its members across the province. We have a saying or a tagline in Michif: Le temps passé, le temps qui vient, from our past for our future. We must examine the past and what got us here in order to protect our futures and support our communities as we move forward. Donna's work is a perfect example of that. We're very thrilled to be here, and I just want to thank Marianne and the Shadbolt Centre for also allowing us to have a small Galleria case that exhibits some of Donna's heritage, her Métis background and culture that she's rediscovering and reclaiming, and that we are so grateful to have her on this journey. There are items out there, and there's also a QR code where you can learn more about our organization. If you're local to the Lower Mainland, we'd like to invite you to a town hall that we're hosting tomorrow at the Surrey Comfort Inn. If you'd like more information, you can visit bcmétis.com or come find me afterwards. I'd be happy to speak about it. We're also very fortunate to have Tonshi Catering that's put together a Métis twist on the charcuterie board with bannock and other delicious goodies there for you to sample and try. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. I hope you enjoy the talk. I know you will. We're so, so proud of you, Donna. Congratulations. Marcy.
Thank you, Cassandra and the BC Métis Federation for your support in everything that has led up to this amazing evening and exhibition. And I'd also like to thank you, Marianne, and the Shadbolt Centre for the Arts for your support, your enthusiasm, and your assistance in making this dream of mine for my MFA in photography be possible here, for allowing me the opportunity to show here. And it was really important to me to be here at the Shadbolt for two reasons. One is that the nature of this topic, I think, really should be disseminated in a public domain. And secondly, I grew up on the other side of the pond. I used to play in Deer Lake when I was young. I spent my elementary school years here, and some of my elementary school friends are here tonight. I grew up as a young adolescent in Burnaby, and I'm really thankful that so many people came out tonight to see my work. I have friends here from law school, from my undergrad, from my professional life. I'm new friends, old friends. I'm really honored and touched that I'm here on my youthful homeland, and I'm celebrating all of this with you. So thank you very much. And I want to give a special thanks to my sister Linda, who arrived. Where are you, Linda? There she is, at the very back. Put up your hands so everybody can see. Linda came on this research trip with me last summer for part of the journey, which was really very meaningful to me. And she came from Brandon, Manitoba to see her children that live here, but I also think really to be at this exhibition tonight. So thank you for your support. And I'd also like to thank Marianne for your land acknowledgement, and also to extend my appreciation for the original caretakers of the land where I live and work, the Musqueam, Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh nations. I'm going to start this talk with an introduction about my history, and then move on to my recent ancestral journey to Manitoba, and conclude with my photographic methodology and practice. I was born in 1960, and I'm a 60s scoop child. My mother, Imelda Gibosh-Sawchuk, was a 17-year-old unwed minor growing up in a very strict Catholic family. And that left her feeling as though she couldn't confide in anybody, inside her family or outside for that matter. And as a result, she never told anybody that she was pregnant. And she left Thompson, where she was working, and traveled to Winnipeg to wait out her pregnancy in secrecy, as a lot of the mothers in the 50s and the 60s did. In contrast to many in her situation, she was actually taken in by a very kind family in exchange for some light childcare duties, and she waited there until she gave birth. But the draconian policies of both the federal and provincial governments were anything but kind. In fact, it was a continuation of the abhorrent practices of assimilation that had already been seen in the residential schools, legislation banning certain activities like the potlatch, Indigenous languages being spoken, and the newly implemented directive of adopting Indigenous babies into non-Indigenous families. There were very active and aggressive advertising campaigns to this extent, as seen here with the AIM program, an acronym for Adopt an Indian Métis Child. These are some of the outrageous newspaper clippings from this time. And my mother was one of tens of thousands of mothers subjugated to the pressures of this movement. Not having a husband, a family, or financial support, she had no way to protect herself from the pressures of the social workers who were mandated to remove babies from situations like my mother's. Many babies were sold, both in Canada and the United States, and in some situations, mothers were told that their babies had died. Some mothers were simply forced to sign the adoption papers. My mother was led to believe that she had no choice but to give me up for adoption. She told me that her heart broke when she signed the adoption papers. Within a few months, I was adopted into a loving and unsuspecting Canadian-Ukrainian family. Rose and Andy Chubby had been wanting a baby for over a decade, and they finally got me, a healthy, happy newborn baby. They were told that I was French, and they had no reason to believe otherwise. In fact, it was only when I found my birth mother in 2004 that I discovered my Indigenous roots. It was incredible to me, especially as I had studied political science in the early 80s at UBC, and I specialized in Native Indian Studies, as it was called then. There was something about the injustices of the Indian Act that spoke to my sense for social justice, even having had no idea of my own Indigenous roots. And there's something called post-memory, as well as genetic memory, and I honestly think that might have been what was at play here. I think my genetic memory was activated during these studies. Over the last 19 years, I've met many family members from my mother's side, and as well as from my father's. My dad comes from the Czech Republic, which explains my recessive skin color. But I think I look a lot like my mom, especially my eyes and my cheekbones. And an interesting fact is that both of my parents go by the name Mel. My mother's name is Imelda, and my dad's name is Melton, but they both abbreviated their names to Mel. And when I met my mom for the first time, and I looked into her eyes, it was like looking in a mirror. Looking into her eyes was like looking into my own. It was very surreal. And when I met my dad, I thought he looked like Sean Connery in his little Not bad genes, right? Learning about my family history and my genealogy has been amazing and such a gift. It's answered so many questions about why I look the way I do, why I have certain behaviors and traits, to more esoteric issues like my access to the spirit world. And while this is my genealogy and does not list all of my mother's siblings, I wanted to mention that she's one of 18 children, and I literally have hundreds of cousins. So I've gone from being an only child to having 7 siblings, 10 living aunties and uncles, and hundreds of first, second, and third cousins. This is rather remarkable considering that up to 44 years of age, I had never met one single person that I was related to. I've learned that over the years that both my maternal grandmother and my great-grandmother and my grandmother were shamans and medicine women. The one on the left is my great-great-grandmother Marie Flora Fagnant, and she was my grandfather's mother. And in the middle is my mother's mother, my grandma Clara. These two women were not related, but both were medicine women and shamans, and both are my spirit guides and were with me on my research trip. In January 2021, after 10 months of living in a world with COVID, I decided to do an online master's degree in photography at Falmouth University in the UK, because what else was there to do in COVID when everything was closed? The timing was perfect. And I'm now in my final months of studies, 25 months later, and this is my final major project, which is culminated in a book, which you can see afterwards, and this exhibition, which hopefully you're here all to see today. The story has been brewing in me for many years and is of my reclamation journey into my indigeneity. It's of reconnecting with my Métis and Anishinaabe culture, of finding and honoring my roots, and I'm really thrilled to be taking you on this journey with me. In preparation for this exhibition and my written thesis, I thought it was essential to visit my ancestral homeland and and to follow in the footsteps of my forebears, to see where we came from and where my mother was born and grew up. I had so many questions and curiosities. So in August 2022, I embarked upon a 6,000-kilometer trip from Vancouver to rural Manitoba, where I spent 1 month researching and documenting with my large format camera, 5x7-inch analog camera that I just taught myself how to use. I think it's really important to point out that I was completely new to analog photography. I had only ever used digital cameras, and I certainly didn't know anything about printing. All I did was, in the past, take my film to London Drugs for developing. So I was on a massive learning curve in both the darkroom and in the field, having never previously developed anything. But what I lacked for knowledge and skill, I made up for with tenacity and maybe a little naivety. For the first leg of this journey, I met my Uncle Ernie, my mother's 83-year-old brother, who showed me around Thicket Portage, the town that they moved to when my mom was a baby. It's right next to Thompson. It's a very small village. My Uncle Ernie might be 83, but he moved around like a man half of his age and spent hours every day for a week showing me special places that he remembered and of his youth. Thicket Portage is only available by private boat or a twice-weekly train right in the summer or an ice road in the winter. And according to the 2021 census, it has a population of 109 people who live in 29 of the 42 private dwellings. And a fun fact that I discovered is that I'm related to every single person in town, including the mayor, Marcel Brightnose, who welcomed us with a fried pike dinner upon our arrival. I met the neighbors, who were also relatives, and I discovered that there's nothing for anybody to do in the town. There's no store, there's no form of commerce, there's no entertainment. Groceries and basic necessities were a 2-hour train ride away, and only twice a week. So I ended up hiring my third cousin Maddie to tour me around every day to give my uncle a bit of a rest. She patiently sat on this quad for hours waiting for me to take my pictures. And what surprised me was how she never seemed bothered by the constant swarms of flesh-eating mosquitoes and horse I literally needed to be covered from head to toe, despite 40-degree temperatures, and even then they bit through my clothes. Maddie, however, remained undeterred. Sometimes she brought her sweet daughter with her, and I couldn't resist taking a few photos with my digital camera, which I always brought along for backup in case I had nothing on a large format. Maddie's dad, Gilbert, took us out for a boat ride one day on Wintering Lake, looking for trappers and fish camp cabins. My Uncle Ernie had spent 15 years fishing commercially with his dad, my grandpa, on these lakes. To be on the water where my family fished for almost a century felt very calming. Uncle Ernie told me that from the time he was 12 years old and when they moved to Thicket Portage, they fished 365 days a year, getting up at 4:30 in the morning and breaking through 3-foot thick ice in the winter. I can't imagine how grueling that must have been for a 12-year-old. My uncle went on to become a very successful geologist, and he co-founded the Birch Tree Mine, which was one of Canada's largest nickel mines when it was in production. This trip was the first time that I had ever met my Uncle Ernie in person, and I'm so grateful that we were able to spend this time together. He's an elder in our family, and he has all of the stories and wisdom that the younger generation doesn't have. And he shared so many stories with me. As we know, storytelling is a very big part of Métis culture. He told me of his mother and grandmother's use of plants for medicines, and he showed me the different plants that they used. We spent a big part of every day going back to his childhood home property, and even though the physical dwelling isn't there anymore, we would just sit and he would tell me stories. I tried to record as much as I could. I wanted to create a series of photos from where the spot of the foundation of the house was, so I asked Uncle Ernie to stand there, and then I moved my tripod over to the exact spot. And when I looked down, I saw this heart-shaped flower. It was really beautiful, and I didn't know what it was, so I called him over to have a look. And he told me that it was a yarrow flower that that my grandma and great-grandma used for medicinal purposes, but it normally doesn't come in the shape of a heart, and it's usually in clusters of many. As you can see from this web-sourced photo, it's usually round and in these kinds of clusters. We both looked at each other, and we knew that it was a welcoming sign from my Grandma Clara. We had both been receiving signs every day, but this is the first one that we acknowledged together. The next day, we went back to this very remote spot, and the flower was nowhere to be found. It wasn't trampled, it was simply gone. It was one of the many signs from my ancestral guides, whom I know Clara to be one of, and they gave me daily comfort when I recognized them. I knew that I was being safely guided in the pursuit of my reclamation journey and was welcomed to the home of my ancestors. Visiting the graves of my grandparents and family members was very meaningful for me, the sacred lands where generations of my family lay. In fact, I soon recognized all the names in the cemetery and realized that not only were we related to everyone in the village, but we were also related to everyone in the cemetery. It was incredibly profound, especially as I grew up not knowing a single person that I was related to. There were so many magical experiences every day, and one was when we visited places that I had archival family photos of, like this one here of Uncle Ernie's brother Harold, his wedding to Isabella in 1956. The wedding took place at the St. Irenaeus Catholic Church in Thicket Portage, and the church has since been renovated, but the profile of it remains the same. And it was an interesting cultural tradition of the time that all the women showing up to the wedding also wore a wedding dress. So the bride is the one on the right. A few weeks later, when I was in Winnipeg, I had the opportunity to meet my 87-year-old Auntie Isabella with her two grandchildren, my second cousins. Uncle Harold died in 2001, shortly after this photo was taken. As my time in Thicket Portage wrapped up, I spent the last days embracing as much storytelling as possible. The shared wisdom, memories, and experiences of my 83 and 85-year-old elder uncles was truly a gift, and I was so grateful to be the recipient of it. A week after the hospitality of the community, hours on the back of Maddie's quad, and losing a ton of flesh, we boarded the train heading south. My Uncle Ernie went back to his home in Snow Lake, and I went to Brandon to pick up my mom and my sisters to head on to the second part of our journey to Camperville and Duck Bay. In my year-long archival research into our family history, I discovered that we are Anishinaabe from Duck Bay. Not one person in my family knew this. In fact, most of my generation of relatives did not even embrace their Métis culture. This has changed in the last decade, and I'm happy to say that we are all on this journey together now, embracing every bit of information as we discover our heritage, and we're proud to be Métis. In my online research in the National Library and Archives in Ottawa, I found an abundance of family history. One important link was to the Duck Bay Band, and my great-great-grandfather, Louis Gabosch's script, relinquishing his rights to live on the reserve in 1887 for the equivalent of $240 at the time, which is the equivalent of $6,000 in today's currency. I also discovered that the Duck Bay Band were left out of treaty negotiations they were left out of the treaty negotiations in 1874, which is part of Treaty 4. And although the neighboring band, the Pine Creek Band, signed treaty negotiations and our treaty under the Indian Act, the Duck Bay Band was excluded. My mother had never been to Duck Bay, as she lived in the neighboring Camperville, and they moved when she was 3. So I was really thrilled to take her back to this land of her ancestors. And here she stands at the foreshores where her forefathers fished. And on the right is the copy of the official script of my great-great-grandfather Louis Gabosch, and that resides in the Library and Archive Canada. We toured the Duck Bay Reserve at the invitation of the chief and the band councillors, and Councillor Marie Campbell, who's second from the left, spent the day showing us around the town, the village. And it goes without saying, of course, that we were related to every single person in this village too. And that Marie turns out to be the third cousin to my mom. And an interesting fact that Marie shared with us is that the band has appealed their exclusion to Treaty 4 with the Ministry of Indian Affairs and are awaiting a hearing. So if successful, this means that the Duck Bay Indian Band will have status under the Indian Act and be included as signatories to Treaty 4. This was a really long day, and my mom is in the early stages of dementia, so we said our goodbye and we drove 1.5 hours to Dauphin to spend the night with our cousin Duke. The next day, we planned to go back to Camperville, which is right next to Duck Bay, and that's the town of my mother's birth. I had heard from my sister Linda that the church secretary in Camperville, Myrna, was our cousin, and I had been trying unsuccessfully to get in touch with her for months. So the following Sunday was our opportunity where I could meet her. I had a lot of questions. And we had planned to attend the church service, which was around 10:30. So we were gonna leave the next morning around 9 o'clock to make it in church at time. But when I woke up on Sunday morning, I felt this incredible urge to get out of the house immediately. It was like 7:45, and I said to Linda, it's 8 o'clock, I have to go. You guys come when you're ready, when Mom is awake, but I have to go now. So I left, and I drove the 1.5 hours, and I arrived in Camperville at 9:30, and I went to the church of the main church door to see if it was open. It wasn't. There was no sign on the door as to what time the service started. So I decided to wait until they arrived, and I went around to the neighboring cemetery just to have a look, and within minutes, a truck drove out of the cemetery. But it was like Sunday morning in Camperville, population nothing, and this was the only vehicle, so I stopped him to ask him what time the church service was going to start, and he said, I don't know, but I can take you to my sister's, she will know, she's the church secretary. So I couldn't believe it. I was like, bingo, now I know why I needed to leave so quickly, because literally if I had waited, he would have gone and I would have never made this connection. I would have missed this opportunity. So here's my cousin, Sterling Beauchamp, and he drove me to his sister Myrna's house, and this was just really another one of those incredible encounters where I know for a fact that meeting these relatives, Sterling, his sister Myrna, their mother Annette, this was all orchestrated by my spirit guides. There's no question, because if I would have arrived 5 minutes later, I would have missed the entire opportunity. And the church service was canceled for the day because the priest had to leave town, so I wouldn't have even known that. And it turns out that Annette, the mother on the left, her father is Philion on the right, and he is my mother's father, Philip. They're brothers. I don't know if you can all follow this, but it's so many people. And in addition to Myrna being the church secretary, she's also the archivist, and she has traced our family history back to the early 1700s. And this was really the opportunity that I've been waiting for. So we went to get her mother, Annette. We returned to the church so we could look at the records. And we spent time on the grounds just talking, and she told me about another one of our cousins, David Chartrand, not to be mistaken for David Chartrand, the head of the Manitoba Métis Federation, but also the same name. He was a 60s Scoop child, and she really wanted to introduce me to him and suggested that we go to his house and see if he was home. But literally, minutes after she mentioned this, the lone vehicle drove by, and it was him. So we called him over, and he came onto the grass of the church, and we sat there talking, and he shared his story with me, which is harrowing and sadly often the norm. He was physically apprehended from his home by the RCMP because him and his siblings didn't go to residential day school for 2 days. So on the 3rd day, the RCMP forcibly entered their house, and 2 of the 5 siblings managed to escape through the bathroom window, but David and his 2 siblings weren't so lucky. So they were apprehended by the RCMP, they were split up, and they were sold to 3 different American families. They never saw each other their whole adolescence. He was violently abused his entire adolescent life by his adopted family, and he somehow miraculously managed to find his way back home after spending time in jail. He was very instrumental in pushing forward the 60 Scoop class action lawsuit for Métis, and he's currently writing a book about his experiences, and there's a very interesting YouTube video on CBC about his story. And I think it's really important for these stories to be shared, as much for the healing to begin, but also for the general public to understand the magnitude of the atrocities that occurred. My mother and sisters never ended up making the journey as my mom woke up exhausted from the previous day. So I returned to Dauphin to get them, and we ventured on to Brandon, where my mom and sisters live. I spent some time with them, and I really wanted to see where my mom went to university. My mom, as I said, is one of 18 children, and she's the only one in her family that got a university degree. I am one of her 6 children, and I'm also the only one to have got a university degree. And I wanted to see where she studied. So my sisters and I took her to her university, the University of Brandon, toured around the alma mater and her faculty building. And my sister pulled out her degree, and I was astonished to find out that my mom had also studied Native Indian Studies, as it was called then. I graduated in 1989 in political science with a major in Native Indian Studies, and she graduated 10 years earlier in 1979. Going on this research trip was fundamental for me, not only to connect with my ancestry for my research, but also to connect with my living relatives, and I always loved spending time with my siblings. I also met some relatives that I had only previously met remotely, so it was wonderful to finally meet them in person. I have so many relatives, and I'm constantly meeting new ones. And so far, I have only been embraced with love and open hearts by every single person that I've met. When I tell my story, I often get the same question of whether my 2 moms ever met. And yes, they did. And for that, I am forever grateful. In the summer of 2014, 9 months before my adopted mom, Rose, died, my moms met in my apartment in Vancouver, and I managed to snap this very candid photo of them embracing as they hugged. They were thanking one another for me. I dreamt of this moment my entire life, and this photo is a treasure that I keep very close to my heart. I also get asked whether there is a physical resemblance. What do you think? Obviously, for people who see us together, the comments are that I look a lot like my mom. So I decided to make a fun collage, pasting half of our faces on the other, and voila, I think we look exactly alike. After my month-long research trip, I returned to Vancouver, and I spent the next 3 months in the darkroom, as some of my colleagues here will know. It was a massive learning experience, and it was in there that I was creating my vision of how to show the visual narrative of this story, which is so complex. And as I'm new to analog photography, having shot digital for years, I taught myself both the large format camera and also how to develop only months before this trip. I had a lot of support from Ken. Ken, please raise your hand. Ken is the president of the West End dark room where I spent most of my time, and Alex, my photographer, he was also in there helping me. Thank you guys so much. It was really very meaningful for me, and I had so much support from them, and also YouTube tutorials, which we know is the new university. So, it was very, very important to spend time there. I spent 3 months, literally many, many hours working and making a lot of mistakes. I wanted to create something very unique and a way that could, decipher what I was feeling inside. So I wanted it to be a bit more conceptual, a post-conceptual, a bit more abstract, as opposed to being really literal or pictorial. And it was my creative way to express this liminal space, this kind of in-between space of bridging cultures. I didn't really feel like I belonged to either one, and I wanted to find a way to show that. So I decided to do it by exposing multiple images in the darkroom, and my negatives were 4 by 5 inches, and so I would just expose one and then another and then another. So most of the images that you see are multiple exposures of 2 or 3 images, and I always used one image of my grandparents' homestead landscape as the foundational image, and then I combined it with other images of ancestral significance. And I wanted to develop them as negatives as opposed to positives, which you normally see when you see a photograph, right? That is a positive. These are negative images, and I wanted them to be negative because it added to the mood that I wanted to convey. The 60s scoop is a dark topic, and it has a dark history, and I wanted my images to be redolent of that. And in the end, I was elated with the results. I finished with 19 framed and matted images that you will see in the exhibition in the gallery hall. And each image is a multiple exposure silver gelatin negative print made by hand by me. I'm really proud of what I've created, and I know that I was not alone in the culmination of any of this. I've waited my whole life for this, and I feel as though I have finally embarked upon my journey home. I would like to conclude this talk with a poem I wrote for my mom and all the moms whose babies were taken. It's called Fragmented Lives. A partial component, never whole or belonging, tormented by haunting sounds of relentless wind, alone with silent and empty echoes and memories of lost and invisible kin. A childhood spent in ill-fitting skin, straddling the precipice of cultural divide, unaware of the truth and the travesty, never knowing the lifeblood side. Colonized corruption with assimilation its goal, replete with manufactured lies and intentional theft, stolen cultures and practices of genocide, leaving the wombs and the wounded empty, alone, and bereft. Thank you. Thank you so much. This was really a highlight for me. I've been a professional photographer for 9 years now, and I think this is my 10th exhibition. I don't know, it says on the wall outside, maybe my 11th. It's my 7th book. This is the most important piece of work that I've ever done. It's the first time that I've ever exposed myself like this. I feel as though I'm naked in front of you all, and I'm really glad I went to Pilates last week, therefore. And I really am honored and feel very privileged that you've all come so far. I know people are here from Victoria and from Brandon and from all over, and that you've taken your time out on this Saturday to come and see the show. So I invite you to, we're going to open up the buffet to have some food. The cash bar is still open. And now when you look at the work, you have a completely new perspective and paradigm of which you can appreciate it. So let's mingle, let's party, right? Thank you so much. I'm sorry, I'm ahead of myself. I'm super hungry and excited about the food. We are opening it up to question period right now. So Marianne, my curator, who I thank you so much for curating the show, and Cassandra, we're going to sit here in kind of a semicircle, and we're going to open it up and take some questions, and then we will open up the food. Do we need a mic?
I don't think so. That's not. I don't like some of my voice. All right, go ahead. Elsa.
Well, you talked a little bit about your mothers and your ancestors. How is your story translating to your